Today, I sit in a place where I can be compassionate with that and say, wow, that must have took a lot of courage. In 2018, when I sat down and had a conversation with you, I just felt a lot of pain. It was an evolution from one coffee to deciding to work with you from a coaching perspective to completely changing my life.
That's something that's always impressed me and impressed upon me by you, which is this boldness and willingness to be seen.
The biggest thing in my life has been when somebody opens a door for me, I'm gonna frickin' run through that thing. I don't always know what's on the other side, so there is that courage aspect of it, of like being willing to take action in the face of fear. Like stepping into that experience was one of the best things that I ever did.
Aloha, and welcome to another episode of the Embracing Human podcast.
Before we begin the next episode, I'd like to take a quick moment to ask for your support in helping us grow our podcast.
Take a moment to like, subscribe, or follow on whatever platform you're watching this on.
Your engagement helps us to grow our platform as well as allows us to invite even more interesting interviews in the future. I hope you enjoy the following episode and wish that you gain insight, clarity, or knowledge about what it means for you to embrace being human. Well, everybody, thank you for tuning in to today's podcast interview. I have a very special guest for you, someone I get to call a friend, not quite a colleague, but a collaborator of sorts. And that person is Josh Gratsch. He is the CEO of Ascend Innovations, and maybe he'll agree with this part, maybe more importantly, a father, a husband, a son, and just an all-around great guy. And he was my first coaching client. I'm very excited to have you on the podcast today, Josh, and just to talk a little bit about what it means to be human, your journey as a man in the world, and we're going to hop around to a lot of different subjects. So I'm really excited to see where this conversation goes. So thank you for being here.
Hey man, thanks for having me. I couldn't be more excited to sit here and have a dialogue with such a special person in my life. So let's dig in.
Awesome. So on the To Be Human podcast, one of the things we really want to talk about is exactly that. Like, what does it mean to be human? And something I think every man can relate to is the idea of being a son. And I think it's a great place to start as just a backdrop to your healing journey, how we met. If you could just share a little bit about your journey healing. I know part of that included your dad, but however you want to start the journey of your journey.
Let's start with me becoming a father myself. Mariah and I met in college. So I played baseball in college at Urbana University, small D2 school. Met Mariah in Columbus. She went to Ohio State, was out at a bar that night, and happened to literally run into her. And kind of the rest is history from there. We were married, I think 2 or 3 years later. So we got married in 2015. And then that was August of 2015. And then I think by October, she was pregnant with James, our son, who is now 8 years old, which is incredible how fast time goes with that kind of stuff. But James made me a father. And that was 2016. And I hadn't really at that point comprehended what it meant and what I was about to get into in terms of becoming a father and how that relates into who I am as a person, as a husband, as a man. And it was kind of a start of a whole journey of internal discovery and exploration and really understanding the answer to the question, who am I? I think we met in either 2017 or 2018. I remember sitting down in the Ghostlight coffee shop where we had our first really in-depth conversation. In that conversation was when I decided that I inherently trusted you and was just going to begin to tell you a lot of the things I was beginning to uncover. It was 2 years after becoming a father, so James was 2. And at that point, I understood at a surface level that there were some things from my childhood that were impacting how I showed up for Mariah as a husband, how I showed up for James. It was going to be a year later in 2019 that I became a dad of 2 and Maggie was born in 2019. And I remember telling you all about the story of my dad. And it's interesting, the way I told the story then versus the way I may tell the story now is slightly different because I look at it through an alternative lens. But long story short, my dad's a Vietnam vet. He has 50, 60 years of untreated PTSD, and something he'll always carry. He saw one therapist when he got back from the war, and they made him feel shame, and he'll never go back again. And a lot of that, as especially as a child and as somebody who hadn't done any of the work on myself to really separate and understand his traumas from my traumas, I absorbed a lot of that, and I felt a lot of that. He's somebody that basically had his life ripped away from him at 19 years old as he was drafted, and he had two choices: go to Canada or go to war. And today I sit in a place where I can be compassionate with that and say, wow, that must have took a lot of courage. In 2018, when I sat down and had a conversation with you, I just felt a lot of pain and lack of understanding of the ability of myself to take responsibility and let go of some of those things that I experienced in my childhood that were a result of the traumas that he experienced in participating in war and doing and seeing some horrible things. And he struggled with alcohol, especially in my teenage years after my brother died in a motorcycle accident. And that was his way to escape what he was feeling. And there was a lot of things through my teenage years then that I experienced that as I got into college and things of that nature, I naturally suppressed, forgot about it for a while. And then when we sat down for coffee, you said, hey, read this book. I don't want to talk about it, by Terrence Real. And it brought up a lot because that's what happens, right? When we have this understanding, and I read the book and I was like, oh, reading about male generational trauma from father to son and really understood what was going on, I got pissed. I wanted to blame. This is the first reaction I had. And that kind of set the course for 2 years of working with you, where I now sit in a place and say, it wasn't mine to carry. And I can feel compassion for all the things my dad experienced because I could not even begin to wrap my head around going through those things. But it took me a while to flip that narrative and have that reframe to say, oh, I'm not upset with him. I don't blame him. And I learned how to take ownership for my own life and become the person that I am today. And, I described that in a 5-minute description, but obviously there's a lot to unpack with that. And I think the interesting thing about my experience is when we started that work was stepping into still figuring out being a husband, right? Ryan and I had been married for 3 years. I'd just become a father, had a 2-year-old, and a year later, a new baby, stepping into leadership with Ascend. So I had joined Ascend at 26 in 2016, early on with the formation of the company as a data scientist. And then 2 years ago, took over the CEO role. So I was kind of continuously stepping into not only who I am as a person, but then that manifested into who I am as a leader and reflects in everything I believe in when it comes to leadership. And that's all about, we're all human. And it's all about how you treat people, how you show up for people, how you build trust and things of that nature. So it was an evolution from one coffee to deciding to work with you from a coaching perspective to completely changing my life. So now we have to figure out where to start from there as far as going a little bit deeper.
No, I really appreciate it. And the recanting of those memories just brought me back to that Ghost Light Coffee. I remember exactly where we sat, and I remember just you launching right into it. And I think that's something that's always impressed me and impressed upon me by you, which is this boldness and willingness to be seen. And I think almost unbeknownst to you, and maybe as the words came out of your mouth, you were like, "Oh shit, we're going there. Like we're just there now." And it really spoke to your soul or your essence's desire to heal, to change, to forge a new path. And I think it's something that so many men are confronted with right now. They're looking at the versions of themselves that they don't enjoy, and they don't really have a conscious path out of their own suffering. And I think it almost speaks to life's intelligence that we just found ourselves there because of your Uncle Ricky just connecting us together and saying, hey, I think you guys should talk. And then just we kind of surrendered to the experience, and one thing led to another. I remember we had a conversation in, I think it was 2018, because I was just about to leave Obi. And then we had a conversation in 2019, and then you found yourself on my living room couch in 2020, and it was like, hey, I'm doing this. And you're like, I remember this plain as day. I told you, and you're like, cool. And then I told you again, and you were like, man, that could be me. And I was like, that's why I'm telling you. And you were like, oh shit, I could be that guy. And I was like, that's my point. And you were like, all right, let's do it. And you had just no hesitation because you saw what was at stake, right? You saw the opportunity to capitalize on. And I don't mean that from like a capitalization standpoint, but just the opportunity to be better and to show up in a whole new way for yourself first, and therefore your family, therefore your wife, therefore the world, therefore Ascend. And it's not lost on me that you're at the helm of a lifestyle data science company that is innovating in a way in healthcare to make a profound shift of the way that people meet themselves and the way that we're supported. And maybe that's kind of where we go. Your intro to your healing is feeling supported. What was that like as a man to work with another individual, and in my case, another man, to explore your emotions, your feelings, your vulnerabilities, anything else that came from that?
Freeing, liberating. Before that, I had never seen a therapist. I had never talked to a counselor. Even going back to teenage years, this wasn't something you talked about. Like, I got straight A's. I did well in sports. I excelled. Why would anybody want to talk to me about how my home life was?
Mm.
And I say that through a lens of gratitude as well, because it wasn't all bad. And that was the thing, was like when it all got brought up and I started to see some of the things that were impactful in this narrative I had created in my head, that because my dad did these things, then, well, I'm shit out of luck. That's how I'm going to treat my wife. That's how I'm going to show up for my kids. And I painted this picture in my head that just absolutely had to be unwound and reframed, because ultimately what led me down this path was I realized, and I could see myself doing it, but it was like shooting up the cocaine and not being able to stop myself. Whereas like I'd be interacting with James at 2 years old and just yelling at a freaking 2 year old. And it, like, now I look at that and I'm like, whew. And I still lose my temper sometimes. Like, happens. I'm human. But I have better recognition of the things that I'm feeling and where that comes from and what's leading up to that, such that I can be aware of it in the moment and correct myself. And even if I don't, then on the back end, I apologize and say, hey, bud, sorry. But it was really important to me to go down this path, because ultimately I wanted to improve how I was showing up for my wife, how I was showing up for my son, and eventually my daughters. So, I've got 3 kids now, which at one point I couldn't have imagined. So we've got James, Maggie, and then Remy was born right after I took the CEO role in 2022. So she's about to be 2 years old. And I just remember distinctly thinking, like, and like you said, like, I wasn't hesitant, because the the biggest thing in my life has been when somebody opens a door for me, I'm gonna freaking run through that thing. I don't always know what's on the other side. So there is that courage aspect of it, of like being willing to take action in the face of fear. Like, yeah, I was scared as hell around, like, well, what are we going to talk about? What are we going to do when we're sitting on a couch across from each other? But to bring that kind of full circle, stepping into that experience was one of the best things that I ever did, because it produced multiple literal reframes and rewiring of my brain. And you remember the moments where I came back to you, I was like, so this happened over the weekend, and now, like, I'm just waiting for it to come back and it's not coming back. What's happening to me? Kind of moments that have and will forever impact who Josh is. And not only who Josh is today, who I am today, but also, we always referred to the little child version of myself as Joshy, as like, what does that little guy need? What didn't he get? And what did he get? Because that was also the beautiful dichotomy of everything, was that in my childhood, like, yeah, I had these challenging experiences, but I also had these beautiful experiences. Like, my dad was there. He was always there. He always told me he loved me. He was at all my ball games. Like, they empowered me to travel around the country and play baseball, which led me to playing college baseball. Like, he took me fishing, he took me hunting, he taught me truth, integrity, and all these things. But for a while, I refused to see that, because I was clouded again by this construct I had created. And I really needed somebody to sit with me and help me understand it, such that I could reshape the story that I tell myself today.
You mentioned something in there about being with yourself when James is dysregulated or you're dysregulated, and I think so oftentimes we because of the information deluge that is the internet, we look for all these tips and tricks and practices, but in the heat of the moment, it doesn't even occur, right? So it's just autopilot in a way. And so I'm curious to hear your experience as a man who, for all intensive purposes, pre our work together, was focused on doing, right? This typical narrative of society of like do, and do it better and do it bigger, and this shift that you had into this being awareness. And some might notably say that as like, I think it was Paulo Coelho that said, like, the longest journey we'll ever travel is the one from our head to our heart. And so, could you speak a little bit about your journey going to be human instead of trying to do human, and then just how that's propagated out into your life, whether it's your family or the way that you run this business that you're leading or anything else?
So growing up, I was shown love in multiple ways, but where I was really given praise and affirmation was when I got good grades, when I did well in sports. It was really that doing aspect that created that driven version of me, an ambitious version of me, which, it was neither good nor bad. It just was. Like, that's where I got affirmations. They weren't doing it to in any negative way. So it wasn't any pain I carried from that experience. It was simply that was just the nature of what I got praised for. And I liked it. And that kind of propagated into as you got into college baseball. I would outwork anybody on the field. I can state that confidently. I was not the best skill wise, but I would outwork anybody. And once I got into my career, taking initiative, drive, ambition, hard work, those are still all core tenets of how I show up today. But there's a critical distinction. That came from a place of I'm not enough unless I'm doing. Unless I'm outperforming and wielding my sword and conquering, I'm never going to be enough. I'm never going to be enough for my wife. I'm never going to be enough for my kids. I'm never going to be enough for myself, most importantly. And that's a narrative I had to change. And that's where we did a lot of work on this conversation around being versus doing. And the beautiful part is it didn't mean that I had to let go of being driven and ambitious, but to map that from a place of abundance instead of scarcity, to say, like, no, it's okay to have a learning mindset and want to constantly improve. That's the core aspect of what got me into being willing to do the work on myself, take a look at my past, reframe it, and become literally a completely different person. Still me, but a different version of me that was always there deep down, but that was kind of clouded by the judgment of myself and the things that I had experienced. So shifting from doing to being, still while still maintaining that drive and that ambition, just gave me the ability to step back and really think about the purpose and why behind anything that I'm doing, and really get clarity around, like, well, what are my priorities here, right? Like, I'm sitting here on a Sunday and my family wants to spend time with me, but I have a board meeting on Tuesday. What am I going to do with that? Because in the past, I'd be like, no, no fucking way. I'm going to sit here in my office. I'm going to get that board packet done. And it doesn't matter like what else is going on. Sorry, I have to do this. And that became a place where, one, being better prepared and not leaving myself to a Sunday to get that done. But more importantly, even in that sense of like just being more realistic around, like, what is most important to me? What do I value? Do I want to be that guy that my kids are just watching me through the glass doors of my office do work on a Sunday when all they want to do is spend time with their daddy? Absolutely not. And so it's helped me really reframe those moments and get focus and clarity around what's important and what I'm going to hold on to versus what I'm not going to hold on to. And practically speaking, that just simply means like I can discern between the moments where it's time to just be a father, a husband, a human, taking care of myself, as opposed to being controlled by the things that I need to do, quote unquote, need or have to do, and reframing that to what are the things that I get to do. And that has, in all aspects of my mental health, has completely changed the way I feel, when it comes to showing up as a father and husband and also getting things done because that is still important to me. But I realize that I can get things done and be driven and be ambitious without creating this narrative in my head that's the only way that I can get love. And I still remember like multiple people asked me, another mentor that I had when I stepped into the CEO role, like, does your wife love you because you're a CEO? Do your kids love you because you're a CEO? Absolutely not. They don't give a shit. My wife can barely describe what I do. So no, they care that I'm there and present and with them. And that's where the being comes into play. So one, it's allowed me to be more present with my family and more mindful of that time that like in a few years, the shit I'm doing professionally, nobody will remember. In a few decades, in a few generations, nobody will remember my name. So where's it most important that I spend my time right now? Should I be worrying about the project that I got to get delivered for the client this week, or should I be more worried that I'm walking my son into a doctor's appointment? He's really worried about this little procedure that he has to do. Where should I spend my cognitive load? Well, damn it, I'm going to be there with my son and make sure that daddy is there to explain to him, hey, here's what's going down. It's okay. I've had this done before. It's not a big deal. Versus my mind swirling on, oh shit, the client just called me before I got into this. All like this is literally a dynamic that was happening today where I'm like, nope, I'll get to that after I spend this time with my son. So I can discern those moments. And from a professional standpoint, it's also allowed me to remap the value I assign to being a leader of a company, the leader of people, humans, right? Because like where I in the past would assign my self-worth is like I have to constantly be doing things to earn trust and to earn respect and to demonstrate competency. Oh man, like trust, and you had me read the book The Speed of Trust. The other side of that, it's not just competence, it's character. And so it allowed me to rethink who I am and who I want to show up as a leader. And that's really like if I'm so locked in on having to be the one doing things, well, that completely disempowers the team in terms of delegation. Then I suck at delegation. If it's all about me doing, no, it's about how I show up, who I am. And that's like my biggest saying with leadership is lead with who you are. Be yourself. Like, yes, you need the competencies, but first and foremost, when people are going to determine whether or not they trust you, they're going to look at your character. And so what's so interesting is like reflecting on the path I may have taken from a leadership perspective and who I would be today as a leader if I didn't do that work with you to really deep down understand the difference between being and doing, it wouldn't be the same. I don't think I would be able to lead in the capacity that I do today. So it didn't just impact my personal life, it impacted everything.
I just get to sit over here and just geek out and smile at just remembering all these breakthroughs you had. It's so beautiful to just witness you and your growth and your journey, and I really appreciate your willingness to share it. It's impacting people beyond what you even get to see, and I think that's part of the fun. Where I want to take this is you said some very poignant things that I think are worth touching on because I think a lot of people don't understand the weight of the words they use. You were saying, if I'm sitting in my office behind these glass doors on a Sunday afternoon making this board deck for a Tuesday presentation and I have to do this. I had to. That was how it occurred for you back then. And even sometimes these need tos and how that shifted into this get to experience for you. And I'm wondering for those out there who are leaders, and this isn't necessarily just the CEO suite, the C suites, this is also the leaders of a family, right? The husbands or wives that lead their family consciously. And I'm curious what it took for you to give yourself permission to do things like coach James's baseball team and make space for the things that you love in life, because at the end of the day, we're not going to be reading a Sen's P&L sheet at your funeral. We're going to be talking about who you were as a man for those that you loved most. And so I'm curious just to hear what that journey of permission looked like. And maybe it starts with how your experience of language changed for yourself.
I mean, it very well ties into the conversation around being versus doing. Once I really adapted my value system to thinking about who I want to be and how I want to show up, that allowed me to reframe from a prioritization and responsibility standpoint. So for me, and we talked about this a lot, like it's a challenge to navigate between work and life. But that's where, again, language is important, that it's harmony, not balance. You can call that whatever you want. Some people call it alignment, some people call it integration. The point is, when we are searching for work life balance, no matter how you skin it, you're looking for that perfect center point. And every time you make an adjustment, you're off center. So you're constantly chasing this perfection. It implies perfection, whereas harmony is fluid, it's adaptable. It's being able to see things in motion and in flow and adapt to those things as they're changing. And so when I look at, okay, I've got 3 kids, I'm leading a company, I've got these other interests that I want to do about writing about leadership and doing leadership coaching and things of that nature. How do I prioritize? Again, it comes back to values and principles for me. The most important thing in my life is my family, because they are the ones that will always be there. Not ascend. There will be a point in time where I go do something different. Now, when that is, who knows? That's not the point. The point is that my family is my constant. And so when I look at prioritization through a week, I ask myself, what am I optimizing for? And I actually came up with something recently that allowed me to get a little bit more granular on that, is like, it's the more often than not rule. More often than not, I'm home for dinner. More often than not, I'm at my kids' games or activities. More often than not, so on and so forth, right? More often than not, like, I am doing the things to show up for my wife and my kids first and foremost. And it leaves some space to let myself off the hook, to not berate myself when, like, I'm on a work trip and I missed James's first day of school last year, but I FaceTimed and I did the things. Like, it's just this adaptability to say, okay, sometimes we're going to have to shift expectations and shift routines to do the thing that is most important to us. And I'm not talking important from like a professional priority standpoint. I'm thinking existentially important, right? Like, what are the things, as you talk about later in life, that I'm going to look back on and hope to hell that I did? And the number one thing is that my kids will say, he was there, both physically and mentally. I was there for them. And so for me, that's something that not only applies to myself, but I want to lead by example for my team. I want to create that permission for them to be able to show up. I've got a team member right now that she's about to buy her dream house. And it was, her dream house is a house that her grandparents built 50 years ago. Cash offer fell through. All of a sudden, their offer gets accepted. Now she's like trying to, I'm like, hey, how can I help? Do that. Like, get that done. That's a huge life milestone. So it's not something that it's just like, hey, who am I? How do I show up? But like, how do I create this permission and this culture where people feel like it's okay? My kid's sick. Um, I've got this special thing going on, whatever the case may be. Just giving people, it's that ripple effect. Like, look inward to produce outward. By showing up for myself and that becoming a part of my values and principles, I can create that dynamic to which other people feel permission to do the same. That's my whole philosophy of building a culture, especially when it comes to work-life harmony kind of things. So in that whole line of thinking, when it came to like, hey, you want to help coach this baseball team? It's a lot of like practices, games like 5 times a week. There's a lot going on there. You're going to have to leave work early. 100%. No, absolutely no hesitance there. And it was the best 3 months of my life, because I watched my son grow in so many different ways, not just from a skills sports perspective, but from a just pure raw human perspective. Like, baseball is a game of failure. So him learning what it means to make mistakes, and the acceptance of that, and asking himself, what can I do differently next time? And just his self-confidence, the humility, like, just so many things that I watched in him that were so empowering for me as well, because James was 2 when I started this. There was preconditioning that happened there. There's some things I've had to work on with him from an emotional intelligence standpoint that I instilled. Again, it's where language is important. It's not I have to work with him because of the work that I did. It's I get to work with him because now he knows dad is not on a pedestal. Dad is not perfect. Dad struggles with his own emotions. Me too, bud. And it's that acknowledgement, hey, man, it's okay. Like, the only thing I care about when you make a mistake is literally asking yourself, what can you do differently next time? Show me that you can learn from it. There's not going to be any consequences. There's not going to be anything like that. We're going to talk about it. We're going to learn from it. We're going to move on. And most importantly, we're going to accept it. We're going to accept ourselves when we don't show up perfectly. Because that's something that I struggled with. Is like everything's got to be perfect. And I started to see that that was coming into how I was treating my kids. Like, you have to be perfect. And when I saw that, I was like, running the other way, because the opportunity is I get to instill these principles within them at a very early age. And when we think about male and just family in general, family generational trauma, right? It's not breaking the chain, it's building the chain. So how do I create this dynamic for my kids? And what's going to be so interesting is like the work I have to do with James, the work I get to do with Maggie, the work I get to do with Remy, that's going to be very different, because each of them came into existence at different stages of my own development. And so when I go back to thinking about the idea of responsibility and the have to, need to versus get to, and it comes down to gratitude and being grateful for the responsibilities that I do have as a husband, father, and leader, and taking those very seriously to prioritize those things that I value most, and saying no to the things that don't add up into the areas of my life in which I want to put the most emphasis on. And that's just how I've evolved to lead my own life and lead others.
You mentioned in there this aspect of allowing yourself to feel, and because of the timing of when you did it, there was some extra work. And maybe we could also say it's partially because as a father to a son, as a man to a man, there's another level of experience. But it reminded me of another book that you read, which is Permission to Feel. And I was curious if you could speak to your own feeling journey, and how that played into your relationship with your son and the feelings, or not feelings wheel, but also just the spine of this book, in the ways in which you expanded your own vocabulary of your feelings and therefore let that play out with your family and then the people around you.
So the premise of Permission to Feel, which is a great book, I would recommend anybody read that wants to learn more about emotional intelligence. Their framework is built around the acronym RULER. So recognize, understand, label, express, regulate. The shift that created for me is I did not have the vocabulary for what I was feeling. And as a male, often that comes out as anger and frustration. But it's not often anger and frustration that we would point to when we realize what's actually going on. Where's that coming from? It might be sadness, might be grief, might be boredom, might be tired or hungry. It's all these things that mentally, physically, that could be creating that emotion that we feel that we haven't been given the vocabulary to speak out. Right. So if we cannot recognize, understand, label, and express what it is we're actually feeling, there's no shot at regulation. Because then at that point, we're just in react mode to I'm angry because I don't know what else it would be. And so that really helped me break down when I get in these scenarios where, oh, I'm losing my temper with my son because I'm telling myself this story that I should be doing work that I'm not going to get done. So I'm feeling stressed or anxious about something that I've got coming on this week, and it's distracting me from being mindful in a moment that's could be really special and hanging out with my son or my daughters. And just being able to recognize that makes an absolute difference in then the ability to regulate how I respond, right? Like it goes into like stoicism. You can't control what happens, but we can control and regulate how we respond to a person, situation, or circumstance. And what's the most beautiful about this book is that on the inside of the cover, there's an emotions chart. So it has colors. So red, anger, blue being down, being more like content, green, excited. And it's got these 4 quadrants and a bunch of words that actually describe the emotions in each of these categories on the axes of, I think, pleasantness and energy. And we struggled for so long in working with James, our 8-year-old, on managing his emotions because, as with me, it came out as anger and frustration and tantrums. And it was simply because he didn't know how to express, label, or understand what it was that he was feeling. And I had one day that I was like, you know what? Like, what if, because he could read at this point, it was a couple years ago, I think. And I brought him into my office and I opened up the book. I'm like, can you point to what you're feeling? Instant. And was it anger? No, it rarely ever is. And at that point, it gave him the ability to point to what he was feeling and then express it. Because that's the thing. Like, if he's just in that mode and I ask him how he's feeling, like, he really, even today, he's gotten better at it by using this as a tool to help him learn. But, and we use the chart even less. But in the beginning, like, there was no chance he was going to articulate it. But all of a sudden, you give him a word to point to and help him communicate it. Boom, off to the races as far as like, here's what I'm feeling and why. It was incredible to me. It's so enlightening. Is it really this simple that, like, just giving him the words to express himself actually gives us a breakthrough for helping him understand that, like, dude, you're not mad. You're just hungry. You're just bored. You're just tired. You're just stressed. Like, whatever these other things are. And it's been an incredible shift to watch him now step into being a little boy that I can watch him in real time regulate. I mean, he still does it today where he'll start to you could tell he starts to get frustrated and then he either takes breaths or, like, you can see him work it through it in his mind, or he'll start communicating with us. And so, I mean, that has been probably one of the most gratifying things I've experienced in being a father. Is for a while we felt really lost and helpless around how to help him, because with my wife and I both having struggles from our childhoods, but we weren't taught necessarily how to manage those things. And so we're kind of learning in real time too. But then when we started giving him a method to understand what he was feeling, that instead of labeling himself basically as what he was doing as this angry little boy, we just saw that, like, oh, I'm just having these other human emotions that everybody else has. And I'm not alone in that. And it's a journey we're still on, because now I've got Aggie who's 5 years old stepping into that kindergarten age where they really start to step into their emotions, and so she's a different personality. um but man, it is one of those get to moments. 100%. Oh, I have to deal with this. No, hell no. It is, I get to sit with them and teach them something that is going to impact the rest of their life. Are there things they're going to have to work on as adults? Of course. But it's never going to be that their parents didn't give them acknowledgement and sit with them and say, hey, me too, and be able to talk about those kind of things when it comes to regulating our emotions.
It's so beautiful to hear the ways in which this is integrated into your life in real time, and just how, because of the work you did, right, the natives say that our healing is felt 7 generations in both directions, and because of that, your dad has to do he doesn't need to do less. He doesn't need to do the healing work that you're doing to set down the bitterness or resentment or anger, frustration, whatever those emotions were. And same forward, right? And James now has a lexicon of language that he can pull from to say, oh, actually, what I'm feeling is, I'm upset, because most people don't understand what anger really is. And as one thing, anger is a secondary emotion. It's pointing to another emotion. We also could say that anger is a indication that our boundaries are being violated. And for most children, they don't have boundaries, right? And so it's just a secondary emotion to, oh, I'm stressed, hurt, sad, frustrated, whatever those things are. And to give him a framework to see, oh, when you feel this way in your body, look deeper and do it in a place of safety through co-regulation with his parent. A lot of things in the work that I do around trauma is not just, it's not what happened to you, it's what happened in your body, but it's also, and I think this is a very foundational piece, is it's especially tough if you're alone, right? It's very hard to be in a lot of these really big feelings with no co-regulation, especially as a child, because we're like, it's so big oftentimes we think we're going to die, we're going to be consumed by it. And so for you to have this steadfastness ability for him as a sturdy leader to say like, hey, bud, I'm here with you right now. I'm not melting down, because that is such a hard thing. And this has been a big work for me, but also as a application point is um, maintaining self energy when someone else is melting down, right? Can I be with their experience and not even bring in Scott necessarily, just to be another place for them to say, oh, I'm feeling a lot right now, and not adding on top of that of like, yeah, and this is what's doing to me too, and so this opportunity that we have to be a rock for someone else is such a powerful thing. And as you were sharing, and this experience now that has forever changed your life, it just brought up a very specific coaching session I remember with you around the idea of Mariah and you discussing about having a third child, right? Because there were these emotions that came up about fear and anxiety, and I'm curious to let you tell the story, because what was underlying under that was something else. And once you sat with and reconciled that experience, it gave way and space to a whole new way of being that you didn't really see, call it a blind spot, that now manifested as your third child, Remy, right? As this daughter you have. And for me, it was, I mean, selfishly, it was really beautiful to watch you have another child. Like, you had already had Maggie when we started working together. So it was like, oh, I'm getting to watch your family grow. And for me, again, selfishly, it was just really beautiful to see how you supported Mariah in that, because you were recanting, telling me how you showed up differently in this pregnancy versus the other ones because of the way that you were being with yourself.
It took me a long time to believe that I am a good father. I still carried a lot of guilt and shame with the early years with James. As if any parents can understand, a 2-year-old can be really challenging to work with. And I remember Mariah and I just had no idea what we were doing, and we most parents don't. Like, we were first time parents, like we hadn't done it before. It's natural, and I just didn't believe that I was a good dad, even once we had Maggie and stepping into having 2 kids, all new things all over again. And most of it was just a story that I told myself, because it came back to that like, perfection element of like, oh, I got to do all these things to be a good dad. It's like, no, it comes back to being like, I just got to be with them. And again, mistakes, communicate it, accept it, learn from it, and move on. I would beat the hell out of myself when I would make a mistake, when I would lose my temper, or whatever the case may be, not show up in the way that I would desire to. It always felt like this impossible bridge to cross, that like I could see the other side. I could feel it. I had the self-awareness to know that it was in there. I didn't know how to pull it out. And that's much of the work that we did to step in this version of me that like, and I know we had a lot of conversations around this, but a version that I love. Like that, there was a time where like you wanted to talk about this concept of self-love, and I was like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, to be quite honest. So there was a lot of things that had to occur there to get me to a place to be able to confidently say like, no, I am a good father. I make mistakes, but I show up for them, and I love them, and I will always be here for them. And I think I can do it again. And what was hilarious was um, when we found out that we were pregnant with Remy, Ryan and I had just gotten back from Charleston. And that was one of the most beautiful trips that we had had together. Just being able to, and I remember talking to you about it before, like sometimes on these trips, I get distracted with like what's going on with the company and da 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 da. I'm not fully mindful and present. And for that one, your guidance was just like, hey, man, what could you do ahead of time to make this special? And I did it. And I was there. And it was just one of the, just still today, like we just went to Sedona in February. That was also just one of those trips. It was just us and incredible. But yeah, we did the Charleston thing, had a lot of fun together. There's many aspects of that trip that I still point to from a relationship building standpoint and where we are today. And then we came back and we found we were pregnant with Remy. I was shaving in the bathroom and she came out from the other part of the bathroom and was holding the stick. And I was like, stop. Could you like let me finish like for a second? Because it was just a total surprise. And we had our moments of like sitting with it, because Mariah's a planner when it comes to this kind of stuff. So when it's a surprise, like she literally likes to plan these things around the months and like how everything, but there was no opportunity for that. There was only an opportunity to be with it. And in that moment, of course, like we were just like, here we go. Let's do it. And there was peace with it. Because I had a lot of fear before about, I knew Mariah absolutely wanted to have another kid. And for me, it was all just fear holding me back. It was only the story that, like, I don't think I'm capable of being a dad to three kids, which is complete and utter bullshit, because it's been a wonderful experience over the last 2 years. And Remy, we couldn't imagine our lives without her. She is crazy right now, constantly on top of tables and climbing on things and just a wild child. But she's also just a just a very unique version of us, I would say, and a lot of the characteristics that we're seeing in her. So it took me really seeing and believing that I could cross that bridge, that I could be the person, the father, the husband that I envisioned. And man, I'll just always be grateful for the work that we were able to do together to help me get across it.
It's really it's really beautiful to see how you were willing to confront those fears of not being enough, or just potential outcomes that you didn't know how to support her in the last experience, but now you could show up differently. And I think there's an aspect to this being human for us as men. Is I was talking to this man yesterday about just we often believe it's our job to 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 hold these ourselves so we don't put them on other people because they already have enough of their own. So who are we to add to that? And I think there's something so powerful when we actually let, whether it's our partners or our parents or our friends or a stranger that you met at a coffee shop, into our world. And it allows for such a beautiful opportunity to support, to be seen, to be human. And I think, you know, we go through these experiences, and I'll just say caveat here, does or doesn't come up or needs to be cut, like that's totally fine. But one of the things I'm thinking about is the work we did around your brother dying, and just this death and grief, and what your dad was holding, but for you to take on your version of that healing, or Mariah and having a miscarriage, and these things are so common, but we don't talk about them, right? We have so much shame or guilt or grief that we pack them off to the side. But it's in these really big and really tough experiences where we are met with our humanity, where we're met with such a deep opportunity to support another human through a thing that, in a way, makes us feel completely powerless. And I'm curious, just as another man, your experience, I don't want to call it advice, but just your camaraderie to other people going through it, whether it's another husband or another father, and how you would offer your support to them.
You pointed to two things for me that did produce, at very different ages, a lot of grief. Um, One was my brother dying when I was 12, and as a 12-year-old, I had a lot of instability in my life. And I say that with a sense of like, just with some of the things that were going on at home, etc. And Kevin was a constant. He was my big brother, and I never got to say goodbye to him. And that was something I held on to for a very long time. And today, he is a reminder for me to live. That's why I have this tattoo on my arm. That it's a reminder for me every single day that, when he died, he had a 3-year-old son that never got to play baseball with his dad, or go swimming with him, or go to the lake with him. All the things that I get to do with my kids. And it humbles me. It brings me back to reality. So like, it hurt for a very long time, but then eventually it became this gift and this reminder for me to be here, because there could be a day where I'm not. And it's nothing to be scared of, because it will happen eventually. But for now, I'm going to try to soak up every moment that I have to spend with the people that I love. In those moments of grief around death and things like that, it's most people will never know what to say. I don't know what to say in those moments when other people are experiencing those things. But the thing is people won't remember what you said. People will remember that you were there. People will remember that you showed support and were there for them. And that's it. And, that's the biggest thing that I look for is in myself, and how I show up in those moments for others is I might not have the right words. It's more so just signifying, like, hey, my heart is with you. I'm thinking about you. I'll give you a hug, whatever makes the most sense. And, it kind of transcends into other moments like you brought up when Mariah had a miscarriage pretty late, to the point where like we knew and were told after the fact that we would have had a girl. And that was before Maggie was born. So we had James at that point, and he actually really wanted a daughter. And um, I can't begin to describe what my wife felt as the woman that experienced that. Can't even wrap my head around it. So the only thing I could do was be there for her. And that was hard for me because I am an inherent, historically, still sometimes today, a fixer. There's nothing to fix with that. There's absolutely nothing that you can fix. There's nothing to mend. It is just pure grief and sadness. And what she needed was space and comfort and just having her husband to be there. And it fucking broke my heart when the doctor said that that was a little girl. But life continues. And then we had Maggie. And I still try to wrap my head around this today as far as the feelings associated with it, because I think about who that little girl could have been, would have been. But then I have Maggie. And if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have Maggie. And it's a very weird dichotomy to navigate in my mind. But at the end of the day, like I wouldn't trade Maggie for the world. And these things hurt, but life goes on. And with the mindset that I have, I would say it's pragmatically optimistic. Never going to come in and be all sunshine and rainbows when it feels like the sky's fallen. So that could be from a leadership perspective. Like it just hit the fan. I'm like, it's fine. It's okay. No, hey guys, this sucks. I feel it with you, but I know that we can figure it out together. It's a subtle distinction in language, but it's a really important distinction in language. And I think that applies to some of the really hard situations in some cases. I think that's just the dynamics of the main thing being like, hey, just show up for people. Just be there for them. You don't got to say anything eloquent or, articulate this feeling of sorrow. Like, no, just be there for them. Like, hey, I'm here for you. Sometimes that's more than enough in those situations. And, we, especially when Mariah experienced that, we had an outpouring of people that much of it was other women saying, hey, me too, like I experienced that too, here's what I went through. And not in a way by any means to this, but just to say, hey, you're not alone. And you realize those things are so prevalent and many people experience them, but they don't talk about them. They shove it down, they suppress it, they hold it in. And as we've talked about, that's when things happen within inside of our bodies. And so I think it's so important that we have that support system of other humans that we can just be completely unfiltered with. I think I heard that the other day of like, who are the people in your life that you can be the absolute most unfiltered version of yourself? Because if somebody doesn't fit that mold, you really need to think like, should they be in your life? Because if you can't be yourself around somebody, what are we doing? So I think that's especially important for men from a mental health standpoint. Men have an incredibly high percentage within the suicide rate in this country. And I think that's something to look at. I think that's something to pay attention to say, why do we feel the need to hold these things in? And I think in a lot of cases, it's the feeling of loneliness and lack of hope and guilt and shame and all these things that we pack deep down. Whereas what I've found is that when I open up to people that I trust, it's always reciprocated. And oftentimes, like by doing it myself, it gives permission for others to get things out as well. And I think it's so freaking important that we continue to create those circles where people in general have the opportunity to have those people close, that it's like, hey, I'm struggling a little bit. Let me talk this out. And that's much of what we did in coaching. Like, yeah, there was a lot of guiding that you did, but oftentimes it was me sitting on the damn couch talking it all out, getting it out, like just getting it out in and of itself was therapeutic. So I think, that's it ties into many. It could be grief, it could be um, things that we're struggling with from a mental health standpoint in general. Get it out. Got to talk about it. Doesn't matter who it is. Could be a therapist, could be a coach, could be a friend, could be a family member. Get it out.
You mentioned this idea of loneliness is the ability we have in society right now to be around people yet still feel alone. And I think first I just want to acknowledge you for that share, because I could see and feel the emotions coming in, the change in your voice and the change in just your aura of going back to those experiences and doing it in a very courageous way, because you don't necessarily know what's coming out when you put yourself back into that space, but it spoke volume to, one, your willingness to feel, and two, your ability to support, whether it was yourself or your family or your wife, through some really hard experiences. And I think that's so important. What I don't want to say men need to hear, more so just a gentle reminder that women don't need fixing, they don't need solutions. Oftentimes they just want our listening, they just want our presence, right? And you said yourself you couldn't wrap your head around it, and what I heard is, so you wrapped your heart around it instead, right? You were just there for your wife and in her grief and in her sadness and pain and your own, and the willingness to go through that, because that's, I think, one of the hardest things that we're experiencing as a society right now is an inability to feel. A lot of people say, like, I can't cry, and it's like, well, you just won't let yourself. And people, and it's kind of abusive to even say something like that. Usually in those moments, I'm like, I get it. I know that guy. I've hung out with him a lot. Because in that moment, it's like, oh no, you can cry. You just need to fuck off. It's like so many people want these releases, but they don't have the space of safety for authentic, vulnerable conversation. And I think that what you spoke to there is most people are hoping that they get to be that for someone else. Now, granted, sometimes their advice giving self comes in and wants to feel special or important, so they want to talk. And I think that there's a gentle reminder of like, hey, I'm just asking for you to listen right now. I don't need any advice. And most oftentimes, if I've ever said that to somebody, it's really well received of like, oh, I'm not on the hook for anything right now. I can just be here. I mean, sometimes people are like, I don't like being in my feelings, so I can't do that. So they leave or whatever. They check out, and that's okay. If anything, it's a really loving thing for them to stop trying to be that and knowing that they can't in that moment. I kind of want to take like a hard left here, but I'm curious. You talked about mental health, you talked about loneliness and suicidal ideation or fulfillment, like just fulfilling on that idea. And I think because of the work Ascend does, I'm curious to see or hear rather your take or idea on how we combat, I don't like that word, how we be with some of these problems in society so that we can have a different shift. We can take a different path, and we can start forging some new solutions, because men are 5 times more likely to kill themselves, 12 if you own a gun. And it's not random that we're having this conversation in the middle of Men's Health Month, which for whatever reason, my roommate pointed out a couple days ago that June is also Pride Month. And Pride Month has actually overtaken the conversation of Men's Health Month, which is kind of interesting. I wanted to be like, hey guys, the gays are coming for us, and not literally, but just, it's an interesting conversation of like, what to this conversation about what it means to be a man, what it means to be supported by another brother. I think that might be one of the reasons this relationship was so interesting is most men don't know what it's like to be supported by another man. And so I'm curious to hear where you believe Ascend plays a role in that, where you as a man play a role in that, and you see possible for us as men in the world in the future.
I'll start with the latter. As far as like what it means for me as a man, the most important thing for me is who I am and how I show up and leading by example. Because if I can create that permission for others to do the same simply by how I show up and create that ripple effect, and that's just one of the things that I want to do in life. I had so many people that around me that saw things in me that I couldn't see for myself. And I want to be able to do that for others. I mean, that's why I love leadership, because like my version of leadership isn't just helping people develop from a professional competency standpoint. I want to develop them as from a human standpoint to help them see like, you know, traverse these belief systems that like, oh, I'm not capable of doing that. Like you are, though. You already are leading. You already are doing these things. You just don't recognize it and label it as such in your mind. And therefore, the way you absorb it and characterize it is something very different based on the stories that people tell themselves. So, you know, from a leading by example standpoint, like I do not like the term toxic masculinity at all, because it's beginning to take a turn where it's politicized, um, and it's spoken in a way as if the masculine in and of itself is bad. And when we think about men's mental health and the suicide rate with men being sky high, we might want to take a look at the language that we're using in that and say, do I want a little boy growing up and thinking, I am toxic as a man and associating that with his identity? No, we need to teach young men and other men in general, doesn't matter what freaking age. I see men doing work at all ages where they're finally recognizing like, oh, there's a different way. There's a deeper version of myself that I've shoved away for years, that I thought I couldn't be transparent and vulnerable because that would make me look weak. And that's so beautiful when I see men in their 50s rediscovering themselves. It's never too late for that kind of stuff. There's an age limit to be able to do that internal work. And so I think what's important is we establish an example of what it means to be a man and really make it clear that strength is not negated by vulnerability and transparency. Because if this makes me weak to say I struggle with all these things, I've had the exact opposite experience. Because all I've seen is that builds trust and that lets people know that I'm real. I'm not perfect. I never expect myself to be perfect. And I'm going to show up just as who I am every single day. And they know exactly what to expect from me. And they know I'm going to reciprocate that genuine care for them and who they are. And it's okay to feel emotions. It's okay to cry. Like, that's what I want to teach my son. I want to teach my son what real responsibility looks like. It's not just in what you do, it's who you are and how you show up and how you treat people. So I think we really need to be intentional about how we talk about the masculine and how men are showing up as husbands and fathers and brothers and colleagues and friends and teammates and all those, because at the end of the day, men are going to be in a position to interact in these relationships where they create ripple effects. We father a child. It's pretty important how we show up for them, because if we're taught that we can't show emotion, guess what we're passing on? And here we are in this conversation of generational trauma again. So we want to talk about mental health and the importance of that, but yet then we want to label the masculine as toxic. Like, no, there are some traits that some men exhibit that are negative. We all do it. And women do it as well. We all, as humans, get frustrated. We get mad. We get upset. We act out. We react in ego. That's not toxic masculinity. That's just human emotions unregulated. So, I mean, that's really important to me as far as like myself as a man, the relationship I have with other men. And I don't sit here and say that in a place that's like okaying, like when, abusive kind of behavior or domestic violence, like that shit has to be addressed. But that comes from a lonely, hurt male that goes very, very into what those individuals experienced or are feeling that they never had addressed themselves. Doesn't excuse their behavior. The point is, we have to look deeper. We have to really ask ourselves, what can we do ahead of the curve to make sure a young man doesn't turn, a young boy doesn't turn into an angry male as an adult that is capable of doing very dangerous and toxic things. I think there's a different way to talk about it that has more heart in it and really looks at how do we address it? Because we can put slap labels on things all day. Great. How do we actually show up to make a difference? Because I'd love to see the people that'll propagate these phrases, that'll talk about mental health is important, but do they really want to have a deep conversation about what's actually going on and how we can begin to make a difference in the lives of people that are actually struggling? A totally different paradigm to look at things through. So for me, again, who I show up as, how I lead, how I treat people across the board, how I treat my wife, how I show up for my wife and kids, like as a man, you know, that's what's important to me. And I think about who I want my son to be as a man. Like I want to set that example such that whatever partner he chooses in the future, he knows how to treat whoever that is with the utmost respect. And whoever he interacts with in his professional life, he lifts others up around him. Whatever he feels when he's an adult, he doesn't hesitate to say it, communicate it so that he can regulate it. And my daughters as well. It's not just about like my father son relationship, like how I show up for my daughters is going to influence what they look for in partners in the future, how they want to be treated. I literally had a woman recently about how her father was very angry and that had her looking for similar partners, like looking for that dangerous partner, or just like that on edge, and it impacted everything in her relationships, and that like paused me in my tracks where I'm like, I hadn't thought about that, and like who I show up as, how I show up for my daughters, and really demonstrating an example of how they want to be treated in the future, no matter their choices. So I'm not going to sit here and say like, well, with their, I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit who their partner is in the future. All I care is that they're treated well. And, it kind of translates into the world.
Hold on. Can I
And
pause you real quick?
yeah, please.
I need to go to the bathroom. I just want to be able to be present with you, and I have to pee really bad. Hold on.
Yep.
Pause the podcast, everybody.
Pressing pause. I'm going to just sit here and stare at these twin ladies. One is missing an eye, trying to figure this out in real time. What does it mean? I hope he's having a good pee.
Thank you so much. Okay.
I was just hanging out with the ladies.
Perfect. Love it. On to the professional side.
So Ascend is really focused on how we create some of the connective tissues in the community such that as people are traversing various aspects of the system, right? So somebody shows up in the health system, they're going to have general interactions with the justice system. They're going to show up in behavioral health providers, et cetera. Really trying to create the connective tissue and a safety net amongst those systems such as that there's more collaboration and continuity within the care that is being delivered. And the big thing I push for within our company is, hey, at the end of the day, these data points that we look at are humans, and how can we be diligent in making sure that we can do everything in our power from a data and technology standpoint to get these individuals connected to the services that they need. And that's kind of the general gist of the company, and the approach that we take is very human centric. We are ultimately focused on how do we help these community and behavioral health organizations better serve the people that they're interacting with? How can we help them be more proactive, more preventative, and really create the programs and services that can address the growing population that we see from a mental health and substance use standpoint? And the numbers are so concerning. And when we look at emergency department data, for instance, the overdose numbers are still up, but then the suicide numbers, suicide attempts, suicide ideation are astronomical compared uh, to the overdose numbers. And it creates a lot of challenges because our system and society have not yet adapted to data sharing to the extent that we envision it. And regulation, policies, HIPAA, da 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 da. Some of those things just have to evolve. So, in a lot of cases, we're a little bit ahead of the curve, and there's a lot of sensitivities there, right? Because like a lot of the solutions that we're creating are helping drive outreach services, so crisis outreach services in the community, and that's some of that connective tissue that I'm referring to. Is like, how do we empower these new programs and services, crisis infrastructure that is meant to be like a no wrong door, right? Like where anybody can show up at these services and get what they need. Police, mess, etc., can drop individuals off to the crisis stabilization unit or whatever exists within a given community, because everything is different depending on the county or jurisdiction, even state, and how this infrastructure is being stood up. And there's a lot of sensitive things there. Like, well, somebody hits the ED with a suicide attempt, and we're talking about providing outreach services, especially if we're dealing with like an 8-year-old or a 19-year-old. That is a very delicate situation in terms of how that's handled. So a lot of the things that we've talked about today, as far as like, mindfulness, who we are, how we show up, that kind of transcends into how I lead the company and thinking about those situations and dealing with the human life here. So I think a lot of companies, tech companies out there, will just push data. No thought about it. Like, we're getting paid to do this. Let's push the data. That's what we need to do. This is a human life that we're talking about. There are people around this individual and the individual themselves that are experiencing this potentially life-altering situation where they deserve nothing but the most empathy and compassion. And so we really try to hold both those things in tension. And as far as, being able to make sure that we do the things that we know we can do to support the organizations, to get the outreach provided, to get the person connected to services, while being compassionate of like, this person just experienced something that was an absolute crisis in their life. And how do we show up in that way that we can hold those things in tension, and make sure that we're doing our diligence, and how data and technology comes in a very responsible way. I know that's a lot of the conversation around AI right now, and you start to see AI getting into healthcare, as far as ethics and morality and all these things that we need to consider. I think it comes back to responsibility. We have a responsibility when it comes to data and technology, especially in these sensitive areas and topics that are 100% necessary. We should be work like this to advance, but we better do it in a responsible way that's going to honor the human lives that are a part of that. And it's also the stigma. It's also the way that we think about these situations of like, well, there's a lot of people that will say, oh, addiction, they brought it on themselves. Like, no, not always. And in most cases, never. Addiction is a disease. Alcoholism is a disease. There is a reason, because it impacts the way our brain is wired and reacts to these things. And I remember being in a situation in my early 20s where I got a dental implant and they handed me a full vial of hydrocodone. I could have been one of those people, but for some reason, when I took a couple pain pills afterwards, my brain didn't react in a certain way that made me want to keep taking them. And so, lucky me. Well, there's a lot of people that aren't lucky in that regards. And I think the same goes for mental health and just adapting how society views it, because ultimately everybody has mental health struggles, but there's a spectrum there of the severity of what the experiences are. A lot of the things that we've talked about today with me, are deeply entrenched things that I really needed help with. Did I ever experience extreme suicidal ideation or anything like that? No, I can't say that I did. So there's going to be many individuals though that with the similar struggles or more extreme struggles relative to their experience that are having those things. And I think the biggest thing is like just recognizing that how we show up as people, how we show up as a society to support the individuals that are going through the struggle, and recognize it as a disease that uh, in most cases is out of their control until they get to a point where they're receiving treatment from professionals. Like, yeah, like we've got to adapt our thinking, and we've done a lot of work to change some of the stigma around that. But I still hear things that really give me a lot of concern for the compassion that our society has for the individuals around us, where it's very easy to pass judgment. And it's like, well, it's easy to pass judgment until it's your son or daughter, because then that completely changes the tune of whether or not we want to refer to it as, well, that's their problem. They got themselves in that situation, versus like, maybe infuse a little bit of curiosity and say, what's your story? How'd you get there? I think it's with all these things, like thinking a little bit differently, being a little bit of a better human, thinking about how we treat other people, how we react to things that's like, it's not mine to worry about. It's not my problem. And indifference to some things that just are not for us to fix or solve, but we can and should find a way to work alongside them and be with some of these things that we're going to encounter in life.
I have a lot of excitement, but also the word there is peace, knowing that Ascend and you as their leader have this mindset around mental health and the compassion that we can bring to it. Because, I'd never really, this is really interesting as you were speaking and you said, addiction is a disease, alcohol is a disease. I think for a long time, I never really saw it as that. But what was interesting is this etymology of dis-ease, right? So the lack of ease does create things like alcoholism and substance abuse. And what's interesting is I too once was handed a bottle of Vicodin, except I was a little different than you because I did get addicted to it. And through college, I figured out how to pharmacy shop the Michigan State Medical Center. And I figured out ways to get muscle relaxers and Vicodin and this cough syrup that they didn't think anything of. And so I could go in there and say, I had a really bad cough and I need an expectorant, and the one that you need to prescribe me is called Tussianix. And they would do it, no question. To the point where the doctor literally got in trouble and told me, he's like, I can't give you this prescription anymore because I've been like docked or, like called out by his superiors because they were like, this isn't normal. And I remember for a long time, I never thought anything of it. And it wasn't until much, much later when I realized, like, wow, I was flirting very hard with an opiate addiction, most of which a lot of people don't come back from. They find other things like Oxycontin. And a lot of my friends did. And some of them, it didn't fare well. But for whatever reason, Oxycontin was never a thing for me. I didn't like sitting still, so I couldn't actually, it just made me sick. But I remember years later telling my parents, like, yeah, I was addicted to Vicodin in college. And they were like, what? And I was like, you think this is abnormal? Like, you see this childhood trauma? Scott, what do you mean? You had a great childhood. And I was like, yeah, compared to you, maybe. Shit wasn't good. What are you talking about? And giving myself the space to talk about it, whether it was the coach or with the therapist or anything in between, plant medicine exploration, to give me a way out of that suffering, because for a long time it was a really dark hole. And I've been wanting to make this post for Men's Health Month about, like, men are 12 times more likely if you own a gun. Shifting this conversation about, why don't we ask for support? Where did this lone wolf mentality come from that it's all up to us? And I really appreciate the endeavors that Ascend has taken on to create a conversation about this, because you're right. Most people don't think anything of it until it's their kid. Like I remember someone, Caitlin, my past partner, said, like, I don't know how we got talking about like strippers or something, but she's like, every one of those is someone's daughter. All these people are someone's baby. She would see homeless people on the street and just start crying. She's like, that's someone's baby. And it's so true that we don't think about it until it hits our home. And what we're finding now in society more than ever is it's hitting a lot of our homes. And I think it's allowing for us to have a come together moment of, like, we're going to do this differently. We're going to circle the wagons. Like I say, when the world's burning, circle your wagons, and take care of your family. Take care of your friends. Check on your friends. Like, see how they're doing. If they're not reaching out, reach out. Because I think there's something so beautiful about support right now in a world where we have it that nobody cares, and it couldn't be farther from the truth. And again, I just to really appreciate the way you show up, that you model that people care. And it doesn't mean they have to be your son or your daughter or your wife. They could be your boss, they can be your teammate, they can be the guy in front of you at the grocery store. And we have such an opportunity for impact right now. And so I just really want to acknowledge you for not only the work you do, but how you show up as a being in that. It is not missed by those around you. And I really appreciate the time, even for today, to take to talk about some of these things and to let people into a little slice of life that Josh has. And it's really powerful. And I really believe it's one, not random that you were the first to be on this podcast. I just appreciate your willingness and to be my first coaching client, and to be a man in the world that's sharing it himself now as a leader, as a executive coach, and letting have life's bidding with you, seeing that like it's got a plan for you and you get to surrender to that is a really great thing. And I guess I had some rapid fire questions. They don't have to be a rapid answer, but if you're willing, as maybe a wrap up. But if you have anything that you want to discuss, I want to create time for that as well. The first is, as a human, what is your favorite way to relax?
I have come to just really love reading and writing. So for me personally, if I'm relaxing alone individually, I love books, because like as I've um stepped up in leadership roles and also evolved my thinking as a person, that has been one of my go-to resources to learn from a leadership perspective. I've constantly now especially been in a position where I don't have anybody directly above me in my day-to-day to teach me to learn from. And so like I've kind of reframed that to like I often learn from my team, but also like books, podcasts, things of that nature. So I really enjoy reading. And like over the past year, I've really found my voice in writing. And I would like to write a book someday. And what that's about, I don't know yet. So I kind of stepped into this realm of like, I think all leaders should have a writing practice. And that kind of turned into something that was beyond leadership. Like it allows me to wrap my head around the things I'm thinking about every week, whether it's values, principles, situations, circumstances, et cetera, and how to handle that. And that influences how I show up. So I love writing. I love reading, sitting, drinking coffee. Um, and then, there's also the family side. I love a good, quiet Sunday afternoon where we're sitting out on the deck and the kids are just running around laughing and playing, and Mariah and I can just look at each other without saying a damn word and communicate with our eyes. Someday we're going to miss this. So I've got a lot of those moments right now, and it's the constant reminder to myself that someday I will wish like hell to be back here. So, it's even, I would say, relaxing when I get to coach my son, because like that's not work. That's just getting to be with him in those moments that he's going to remember for the rest of his life.
I just saw like this blog post that you get to write called "From Bourbon to Books." I remember when we were, because there was a point when you were like, that was the way to relax, was a glass of bourbon, and I distinctly remember when you came to me and you're like, I haven't been drinking at all. I was like, cool. And then to go back to like, I can drink whenever I want, and I don't need to. And then now to hear your answer of like books and like self-expression and presence, it's really, really beautiful. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I struggled for a while with alcohol. I know I talked to you about this. There was one week where I and I were driving back for something. She's like, I noticed you've been having a drink or two every single day. And my response was, name the last time you saw me drunk. And to her, just, type of person she is, she just calmly said, you're missing the point. So yeah, I had to yeah, I used to use a bourbon or whatnot to quote unquote relax. Really what I was doing was escaping and numbing. And once I was aware of what I was doing with that, I was able to reshape the relationship to be like, yeah, I still drink. when I go out on a date with my wife, when like we're sitting and she's like, "Hey, you want to have a glass of wine?" Like, okay. But if I'm walking out of this office and I had a stressful day and I go to grab a bourbon, that's not relaxing. That's escaping and that's numbing what I'm feeling. So now if I walk out of here and I'm stressed, I go play. We talked about that a lot. Go play catch with my son, go run around the house with Remy or Maggie. So yeah, it's been, that's another area that I've been able to shift where that's not a relaxation technique for me anymore. It's just it's a guilty pleasure and an enjoyment that I have from time to time.
Second question. What beliefs have you had to surrender in order to get to where you are? And it could be just a big one. It doesn't have to be all of them. We talked about a lot of them today.
I'll just say the first thing that comes to mind is I will never be perfect and I don't want to be. That of that an acceptance of myself and who I am and how I show up in my entirety, for better or worse, is so just freeing and liberating. So really leaning into that because I mean you can attest to when we first started working together, well, perfection was like something that I latched onto and in alignment with that whole narrative around never being enough. Well, I'll be enough when I'm perfect or when I achieve these things. My whole goal through my 20s was to become the CEO of Ascend. And then I attained that and I didn't feel shit. And that was one of the best things that ever could have happened to me because that taught me very quickly about 2 years ago when I took the role that it's not about that, man. Like, what about like leading Ascend have I enjoyed? And that's how I got on the whole focus on of leadership and just really what I fell in love with about really supporting other people through their journey because I've had people to support me. And that felt so gratifying recognizing what that turns into for myself that like there's nothing more I want than to create that feeling for other individuals.
What is one piece of wisdom you'd share with others on their healing journey?
Be patient, take it in stride. When we first started working together, and this was a 2 year process, right? So when we first started working together, I remember thinking early on, like, okay, let's go. When are we gonna do it? When's this gonna happen? Like da 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 da. Like, and it's just not how it occurs. There's a lot of methods out there that they're working with in therapy, whether it's EMDR or critical memory integration, da 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 da, that like has these methods that can pluck traumas rather quickly. But when it's a talk scenario, when you're back and forth with somebody and just expressing it out, it takes time. So just be patient with yourself. And those moments that you look for as far as where the reframe or the light bulb goes off, they kind of come when you least expect it. It'll just happen. I remember when I had the moment where I'm like, oh, okay, I don't blame my dad for like childhood stuff anymore. I was driving home from the gym. Some certain things occurred in my mind and certain things had happened that weekend that just kind of transitioned into like, oh, okay, there it is. Be patient and give yourself some grace along the way.
Great words of advice. Wisdom. Two more about life. What do they miss? Like, what do most people miss? Hold on. How did I write this? What do you think what is one thing you think most people are missing about life?
Joy in the experience. So something that I've been able to rework in my mind is how I set goals, how I have aspirations. Always used to be about the destination and like being the CEO. Well, that taught me very quickly that no, once you achieve the thing, then you're on to the next thing and you didn't even enjoy the thing. So like enjoy doing the damn thing. Like I don't want to use the cliche, it's the process or it's the journey, not the destination, but it very much is. Like it is like we have to find some joy in the process and fall in love with doing the work, right? Like because that's where all the magic happens, where we evolve as people, where we evolve ourselves and our thinking and our perspectives and our principles and our values, and we learn. That's where the beauty happens. And I think like for me personally, and that's where this is coming from to answer this question, is like I've missed so many moments because I was so fixated on where I was going that I forgot about where I am now. And that is like a core principle for me right now is like pay attention to what is happening right in front of you. Because I'm even noticing in moments of challenges and adversity and like making sure that when I navigate that, like, hey, good job, bud. Like my self talk before any of this occurred, like, hey, dummy, like constantly. Whereas it's like, oh, like, all right, good job in how you responded to that. And like those little affirmations and finding joy in that was kind of challenging and you navigated it pretty well. Good job. Like, and that actually a little bit of excitement in navigating those kind of things because it really puts my problem solving to the test. Like, whatever it is for people, like, don't miss out on that. Like, enjoy the process. Like, I just heard so many people talk about, like, yeah, I wrote the book. And then I realized that I didn't even experience writing the book because I was so worried about writing the book and launching the book that then, like, the whole experience itself was gone. So I think that there's an opportunity to reframe that perspective in our mind to still go after the thing, but don't forget to enjoy doing the process of doing the thing.
Such a good one. And last but not least, what does it mean to be human?
To be human. And I think, all right, there's the phrase that just popped in my head is holding space for ourselves and others. I think the human experience is messy, but it always has been. Like, life is full of the unexpected and uncertainty and challenges and adversity and heartbreak and also the beautiful side of like these experiences and moments that captivate us and are things that we hold on to for life is those kind of series of moments that led us to where we are today. But those series of moments that led us to where we are today are not always all beautiful. There's some things that are got to kind of work through the darkness and the shadows and shine light on those things. And I think we've we've got to hold space for ourselves and we've got to hold space for others to be ourselves. So I think that is like, man, authenticity, like be the same person you walk into in every room. The hell are you scared of?
Love it, man. Thank you for sharing all those and just being who you are. It's just such a treat and a pleasure to be with you, to have shared that time with you, and to share this space. It makes me wish that I could do this in person with you, so I could just give you a big hug after this. It's my only. It's not a regret. It's an inspiration to where I'm headed with this work. Is to just be able to fly you to Maui to be like, all right, let's do this in person. It's such an opportunity to dream up a level of impact I never thought possible. But I get to see that in your reflection of your life that I got invited into. And I really commend your bravery for the willingness to say yes, the willingness to lean in and answer the call, and be a model of that for both your family and those directly around you, but just whoever this touches, whoever gets to stumble upon this. Time we shared today. So I really appreciate your presence and your perspectives and your willingness to meet it all.
Thank you. And I appreciate you for changing my life. There's no other way to say it. From the moment that I sat down with you in that coffee shop and where we started this conversation, that was the moment that my life began to change and it will continue to evolve. And I will always lean on much of the work that we did to continue to work on more things that I'm discovering about myself. It is truly an evergreen journey. I mean, there's just always things to look at, and I love it. I love learning more things about myself and thinking differently, and the things that I value and the principles that I follow. And I will forever always point back to that moment that we had coffee together, sitting across from each other in Ghostlight, and you told me to read this book, and then everything went from there. So I deeply appreciate you as a friend, as a brother, as a human, um, because you have an absolute gift for sitting with somebody and giving them the permission to be themselves in their entirety and to see things in them, to see things in me that I never could have imagined pulling out and into existence. So I love you, and I really appreciate everything that you have done for me. And someday there will be a time where we can hug and do the thing. And also one more request is I've heard the first guest, and this is like a consistent theme, the first guest on the podcast gets to consistently come back. So we're going to have to like let you get on a roll, and then we'll come back and zoom back in.
Yes. I love that idea. Thank you for putting that out there. It's quite a treat to bring you back. Every one of these conversations that we get to have, as infrequent as they may feel lately, it always feels like it just picked right back up. So thank you for being a breath of fresh air on this Wednesday morning, and I look forward to the opportunity to share space in person again, get to meet your lady finally, and little kiddos, and yeah, this has been wonderful, and I appreciate the time, Josh.
Yes, sir.
And I love you as well.
Thanks, brother.
This is great.
First one, dude.
That's where we cut it. Yeah, dude, that felt great.
That's good.
That was really fun.
Fun. That's all you gotta do. You just gotta bring people on that'll have real conversations with you, and that's like the best podcast you can listen to.
That's my feeling is the relatability of this, whether it's fatherhood or leadership or all of it. I really believe is a really compelling conversation, and I have it that an hour and a half of whatever this, how probably about an hour and a half of this will cut into, but just to give people that perspective of like it's okay to talk about these things and put one out there and heal and all that stuff. I have a feeling this is going to be a gold mine, just a fucking home run. So,
well, and if you want, yeah, I've come across a lot of individuals, especially men, that are more than willing to go down this path and have this conversation. I've got a couple in mind.
I'm
You know,
sure
one, Josh Perry. Yeah, that dude. So like his whole journey of, BMX, professional BMX racer or athlete. And then he had the concussion, went in to get brain scans. They found the brain tumors. So he went through that whole process, still lives with a couple of them today. And now his whole focus is on metabolic health, and like all because like he has to focus on that to keep himself in remission and all that good stuff. He's got his he's got a lot of things mindset wise that we talk about. Like y'all could go deep. You'd have fun with that.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna pick your brain on some of those things. There's a really wide range that I want to pull in here because it's I think there's some aspect to this where the C-suite and the inspiring people in that regard, people who like want to become that. And I also believe that there's this other aspect to it where it's like normal people. I'll bring Mariah on here, like she'd be like, "Hey, what's it like being the CEO of your home?" And also having a very relatable conversation with moms, with just the bank teller of the world, just like these are full ass humans, and giving people a space to be relatable on a level where I love Aubrey Marcus, I love Tim Ferriss, I love Rich Roll, I love all those people, and I don't want it to always be these slayers in life where it's like I'm not going to be Jay Shetty. I don't honestly want to be Jay Shetty, but this other aspect of life, and I think this is where Leo is going to go off and interview a lot of people of like, in Hawaiian the word is kapuna, and kapuna is like the grandmother elder. To go interview these wisdom holders that live on the land and remind us how to come back to being human. A lot of what you talked about in application is what a lot of people have no fucking clue on how to integrate. And a lot of, I was having this realization a couple days ago, swimming in the ocean. The ocean is the only teacher I need, because the first aspect is I don't have time to get to the ocean. It's like, oh, interesting. Like, I don't have time in my life. What does that even mean? It's like, okay. Or like, oh, do I live in fear? Like, oh yeah, I'm afraid I'm gonna drown or I not have my breath. Oh, so I live in fear. Like, oh, great. Another lesson, and this aspect to life that's just waiting to teach us so much if we're willing to look. And I think that that's part of what this podcast is really going to be about, is creating a conversation to just be like, slow down and look. And so, yeah, I have a really good feeling about it. And thank you for being part of the thing that created a really good feeling.
Man, absolutely. I think it'll be beautiful. I think any conversation you have with somebody is going to be really interesting, because you do have the ability to get people to peel back the layers. And as you said, stop, think, look at it. and really challenge ourselves to adapt a new perspective. And I think a lot of people are willing to have this conversation. They just need somebody to take their hand and say, hey, it's okay.
I agree. I agree. Man, I could do this all day, and I know this is 5 o'clock, so it's time.
The funny thing was Mariah took the kids out to run errands for the last 2 hours because like my office is right outside the main area and like very, very loud. Like this mic would have picked up
Yeah.
everything. So they just came running back in the door. So it is family time.
Love it. Love it. Well, give your family my best.
All right, man.
And thank
I
you.
appreciate you. Had a lot of fun. I enjoyed this.
Yes. Same, buddy. Talk to you
All
soon.
right. Take care. Have a good day.
You too.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the interview today. And if you haven't already done so, please like or follow us on whatever platform you're listening to, and let us know if you have any questions or comments or requests of future interviewees.
And we hope you find this inspiration, the clarity, and the direction to fully lean into being human, whatever that means for you. Aloha.